Is jargon really all just gibberish?
How long have we been maximizing our synergies?
And does legal testimony have anything to do with testicles?
We'll take a bona fide look at the insufferable language of business and the interesting innuendos of legal jargon on today's Words Unravelled.
Welcome to another Words Unravelled. I'm Rob Watts from the YouTube channel Rob Words.
And I'm Jess Safaris, author of the etymology books Once Upon a Word and Words from Hell. And as key stakeholders in today's podcast, it's incumbent upon us to recognize and leverage jargon and gauge whether these terms are a net value add to our lexical toolbox. Isn't that right?
Yes, I think so. Not sure I fully understood, but let's run a few things up the flagpole, shall we? Perhaps even open the kimono?
Yes, we can determine whether these are loss makers or 800-pound gorillas.
Exactly. Yes, we're talking corporate jargon, in case you haven't already picked up on that.
I feel so dirty.
Well, so have you spent much time in like the corporate world? Have you come across a lot of this stuff in reality?
Yes, unfortunately, I work the way I make the majority of my income is sadly not through word origins, but through working with like ad agencies and in the marketing world. And people love to throw around these terms. In fact, a lot of the work that I do is trying to de-jargonize a lot of the work that they put out.
And is this done ironically? Is there irony behind these usages? Or is it, are people using these terms in all sincerity?
In many cases, no irony whatsoever. I mean, there's a little, like when somebody says synergy, sometimes there's like a little wink nudge, but like not as much as you would hope.
Well, for me, I'm sort of relying on what other people tell me are common terms in the corporate world, because I've only really worked in pubs and in newsrooms for the past, decade and a half. And journalists have their very own style of jargon, but are very resistant to corporate jargon, I would say.
Ours are better, right?
Absolutely. And all these sort of strange terms that journalists use that no one else uses, like floral tributes, when people just mean flowers. I really hate that one. I don't know if that was caught on your side of the Atlantic, but that's a big one. Anyway, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're talking about corporate jargon, maybe a bit of legalese later on. But let's start off with jargon and the word itself, because it's got a rather cute etymology, I think.
Yeah, it actually is quite cute. It's from French, as they often are, 14th century word. It's been around for a long time. People have been using the term jargon for a while. And it originally meant unintelligible talk or gibberish or like chattering or jabbering.
Yeah, it evokes the sounds of birds chattering, right? It's sort of a twittering of birds that it originally sort of meant.
It also gives the same sense as the word like barbarian almost, where the root is meant to imitate unintelligible talk, essentially.
Right, exactly. And how does it match up with what it means today? Well, I suppose if you're going to take the bird analogy, it's the sort of wittering away that can only be understood by the people that are doing it, and is complete gibberish to everyone outside of it, I think, which is certainly a property of corporate jargon. By the way, I won't get too deeply into this, but I was just looking into other words for jargon and words related to jargon, and that French word jargon, whatever, there are relatives of it across the Romance languages, but I found a Spanish one, jerigonza. I'm sure I'm saying that badly. Jerigonza.
And that's related to the word. Oh, yes, that would make sense. I'm like trying to spell this in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
Now I see the connection.
It begins with a J, right? However I pronounce it, it begins with a J. But jerigonza is a Spanish version of Pig Latin. It's a made-up language, right?
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And what it entails is putting a p sound after every syllable. It is extremely difficult to perform and doesn't really work with English. But for example, the word hola, hello, would be hopolapa, right?
Oh, that's
and if you wanted
cute.
to say como estás, I've written these down because I can't come up with these off the top of my head, but como estás is como epistapas. And then the response, yo estoy bien, would be yo po epistopo pipi pen.
Well, that's fun. I like that.
Yeah. There was this obscure hit from about, I don't know, 20 years ago, which is just like a little girl talking entirely in jerigonza in this song. And I would encourage people to look up that term, and it's the first thing that will come up.
That's adorable.
It is adorable.
Speaking of which, like, jargon languages are a thing. Like, that is a linguistic term. Linguistic jargons are like sort of specialized linguistic survival kits, like condensed vocabularies within regions or trades, like a cross between a pidgin and a lingua franca. One of the more common ones is Chinook jargon, which is a trade language that combines like North American indigenous languages, English and French, and it was used for like trade and commerce.
I see. Okay, so what have these terms got in common with what we like to more commonly refer to as jargon? I suppose it's a sort of language that is understandable to the people that use it, but doesn't necessarily mean an awful lot to people beyond that.
It's funny, there's another little connection here. In the early 2000s, there were like some tongue-in-cheek instances of the word jargonaut, which is someone who uses too much jargon. So today we are jargonauts.
I suppose there's a whole new set of jargon surrounding modern technologies like AI and such, but there are a few sort of mainstays. I was looking at, so a few years back, about a decade ago, Forbes got into the habit of every year doing a sort of tournament of jargon where they would face off two jargonistic terms against each other, and people on Twitter would vote for one to get through, and then they get through to the next round, and then that would go head to head with another jargonistic term. And the only one that I could find the entirety of the entire tournament, I suppose, was I think it was from 2012 or something like that, in which the winning jargonistic term was drinking the Kool-Aid.
Oh yeah, that'll do it.
It doesn't make an awful lot of sense in the UK. We obviously understand the reference that is made, the very dark reference that's made there.
The fact that one has persisted is pretty brutal, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It really is. And it won this competition, this jargon madness, as Forbes were calling it, by beating Leverage in the final, having defeated Empower, Open the Kimono, Core Competency, and Move the Needle in the process.
I would say leverage and utilize are the words that I have to edit out of corporate folks' stuff as frequently as anything else.
So I guess you just replace utilize with use every time, right?
Anything else, but use is perfectly good. There's no reason to say utilize when use works.
And leverage, what's weird about leverage? There's something odd going on with how that word's being used. Because what it is a noun being used as a verb, right?
Oh,
to leverage something. We have leverage, and therefore we are going to leverage something, i.e. we're going to turn something into leverage, or to make the most of the leverage that we have.
I have a lot of journalism friends who will and former colleagues from my time at Adweek who were generally, they would say that they were against the verbing of nouns, but then I'd be like, well, here are like 10 examples of other nouns that we have verbed, and it works perfectly well. Leverage and other, eyes modernizations and neologisms just happen to sound particularly obnoxious because of the way they are overused, I think.
Yeah, the ones that wind people up. To table, which we've talked about before, as being a contronym as well, because that can either mean to take something off the table or to put something on the table.
Right.
And also to impact. People don't like that. They don't like it when you say it impacts something, to mean it affects something.
That's one. I have a whole rant about this that I will save for perhaps another day or context, but that one is one of those that's overused by AI chatbots in particular. So although I think it once had impact, it's been defanged to the extent that people will say, this generated significant impact. That's one of those phrases that you're like, oh, a bot wrote this. And it's because typically when you find it in AI generated copy, there's no concrete description of what impact has been generated. I
actually noticed this coming up a lot in editorial situations. So in script writing, in news as well, the word impact would find its way in because it was an easy way to get out of actually having to talk about precisely what effect had been had. You just say it impacts it, and you don't even really have to go into cause and effect. It's also me quite lazy. and
Absolutely.
worth avoiding. You've got nouns turned into verbs, but you also got verbs turned into nouns, right? One that I do hear is people talking about learnings that they've made.
Learnings, yes.
Yeah, I'm hoping there will be many learnings from this episode of Words Unravelled. By the way, I did look into that, and it's one of those ones that's, really old, actually, because Shakespeare uses it in Cymbeline. He says, "The king puts to him all the learnings that his time could make him the receiver of." So,
this is the thing. Like, a lot of these jargon terms were not originally jargon or belonged to a different context of jargon. I'd say like the patron saint of every corporate jargon term is synergy, but that's a very old word.
You told me about this. I can't believe how old this word is. I was looking, there's quotes from the 1600s, "The virtue of which synergies and co-partnership with Christ and with God, as he saveth, so we saveth."
Yes, it's biblical.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
It means the same thing as collaboration, collaboration. Also, synergy is working together in Greek.
It has portmanteau energy.
It does. It absolutely does.
But it turns out it isn't.
It's particularly found in 1 Corinthians. "We are fellow workers," which in Greek was synergoi, with God, saying like you are God's cultivation, God's building. And it was this theological principle that ended up saying over the years, collaboration or working together is divine.
I see.
And of course, corporate culture picked up the idea that collaboration is divine.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? There's no way that the corporate culture has been reading Shakespeare and said, "Oh, we're having that learnings word," or they've been reading the Bible and saying, "Oh, synergy, I like that. I like
Right.
that." But now you can have synergies.
Of course. That's worse.
Yeah, which is observably worse. Isn't this funny, Jess? You and I are so laissez-faire normally about language, but this stuff gets our backs up, doesn't it?
It itches in all the wrong ways, and it's because it's so cliche and uncreative, I believe. Like whenever these terms are applied to and overused and I don't know, almost misused, it dehumanizes them.
That's it, isn't it? Because you know that when such terms are used, that no independent original thought is behind it. It's that they've grabbed a term rather than thinking of the best possible term. Impact is a really good example of that. There are quite a few words where you just go, okay, so they haven't bothered to think of their own thing here. But also, I think it's also just a bit of sort of, how would you describe this? Like social signifier? People choosing to use these terms to show that they're part of the club.
And sometimes to keep people out of the club, so to speak.
Exactly. Etiquette, right? If you're not up to date with the latest terms, then you're not really a part of it.
This is, and again, like they're non-specific. Like again, with those AI terms, the ones that it overuses include like delve and foster and ensure and revolutionize. And it's because you can say those things and sound as if you are describing something that actually happened while talking around it entirely.
And the problem with this generative AI usage of these terms is that it will perpetuate it, because eventually we're going to end up with a situation where we have lots of these AI generated text using these words, and then they are providing fodder for the next generation of AI texts, which are using them more. So these words just sort of get perpetuated even further.
I tell my students, if they are able to produce, they're not journalism students, so they're producing different kinds of written work. I'm like, if you can make AI help you be more efficient, I support you. But if I read your work and I think that it sounds like AI, that's not a compliment, because it's like that George Carlin quote that think of how smart the average person is, and then remember that half of all the population is dumber than that.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think that's ungenerous, but I also love George Carlin, so.
I think AI writes pretty well, in terms of grammar and such. It's more or less flawless, right? But what it lacks, quite obviously, is originality and humanity, I think. Thank goodness.
It sounds like the average of every terrible LinkedIn post you've ever read.
Yeah. Although I think it has above average grammatical abilities.
Yeah, I would say that. And that's because it's formulaic and it thrives on formula. The text we put into it becomes data, and the data is used to reassemble text into different shapes, essentially.
Yeah. There you go, some hot takes on AI from us.
Yeah, right.
Actually, hot take is probably a sort of internet
here we
jargon,
go.
right? Isn't it? Is it internet jargon or is it Gen Z jargon? Cursed
I
hot
would think
takes?
that's pre-Gen Z. I think we were
Okay.
I think we millennials were hot taking back in the day.
Okay, that's us. That one's on us. Actually, I was looking at some other research that was done by Preply, which is a tutoring platform, but they looked at corporate jargon that's made it into everyday usage. And you realize, yeah, these kind of have done, like FYI always started off as corporate jargon. And I think you do find people using that day to day. I've definitely used it. It's quite simple. It's quite efficient.
Yeah.
I don't think I've necessarily made any friends, and I'm not proud of it, but I have used it. At the end of the day, people say that an awful lot. You find talk about a win-win, being on the same page. Although they've got on this list, they've got circle back. Which, sends a shudder, doesn't it? What's your understanding of when someone says they're going to circle back to something? Does that mean they genuinely are?
I don't. That sounds like an I'm going to put this off indefinitely situation.
Yeah, isn't that what someone says to not embarrass someone else in a group meeting?
Let's circle back on that later.
We'll circle back on that one later. Yeah.
I think the more tolerable jargon terms, and it's probably simply because we've gotten used to them, so maybe our disdain is a little misplaced. It's the ones that have translated to multiple contexts. So like we have a lot of sports terms that have now become corporate jargon, like touch base, drop the ball, ballpark projections, Hail Marys, slam ducks, and blindsides. And those can often be used in non-corporate contexts without getting too much side eye.
Yeah. We'll talk about the really sort of egregious stuff on this episode then.
All right.
What other ones are there? Oh, okay. Here's one.
Okay.
The use of the word solution in this peculiar, what feels a very modern way.
That screams to me that you're going to sell me some enterprise software.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're a company that provides cleaning solutions, and I don't mean solutions as in detergents, then what do? I mean, you do cleaning, right? You clean things. You don't need to talk about solutions or transport solutions. You transport things, you know.
I look upon that word in corporate environments with the same skepticism I do the word revolutionize. I'm like, oh, did you really revolutionize it? Did you really solve the problem? And to what extent?
Or how about disrupt as well, which is exactly in the same ballpark as you already just mentioned. But yeah, to disrupt something. Have you really disrupted something? Because the use of the word disrupt is now so cliched that it is in itself undisruptive. By the way, do you know what the older version of the word disrupt is? By older version, I mean it has the same etymology, but we don't use it so much anymore.
Well, I know it's a back formation of disruption, much like a lot of those TION words. But what was its predecessor as a verb?
I didn't know that. Okay, disrump is the older version.
Because rompere is the root.
You got it. So I would like us to start saying we're going to disrump the industry. Now, it does sound like you're going to remove the arse from it, but that's not what it means.
But that's the same root as words like corrupt, erupt, abrupt, and interrupt.
Yeah, and the dis at the start of there is not a negative. It's one we've talked about before in words like distribute. It means to widely. So to disrupt is to break apart, break asunder. Yeah,
which is kind of funny because rompere means to break. The dis on the front of it almost sounds like fixing it again.
Yeah, it's funny, it does,
rather than being duplicative.
Yeah. So to rupt and to disrupt could effectively mean the same thing. That's interesting, actually. Yeah, because interrupt in French is interrompre.
Between the rumps.
Here's one I had to look up. But I have definitely seen on my LinkedIn feed and in people's descriptions of what their organization does. And it is vertical.
Vertical is a word that was frequently used when I was the audience engagement director at Adweek, because vertical is also a journalism jargon term. A vertical is like either a segment of a business that's on a particular topic, or it can be like if you have multiple sections of a news organization's website that are on different topics like politics, culture, news. Each one of those is said to be a vertical.
Right. So is what we're supposed to imagine is there is a sort of horizontal that is going through all of the different sectors. And along that horizontal are loads of verticals. You imagine vertical lines, and off each one of those is an individual sector. So if you serve the healthcare vertical, you are providing products or services to the healthcare sector and not the others. Whereas if you have a sort of horizontal approach, you're basically supplying something that you're hoping everyone will buy.
Right. Adweek's horizontal is advertising. Adweek's verticals are creativity, ad agency, news, ad tech.
I don't like it.
I don't really either. I'm just used to it, I think.
That's all I've got to say. Yeah, I think I don't like it because I didn't quite understand it, but I don't know. It seems like an unnecessary to call on it's sort of a metaphor, right? That feels quite exclusive.
I feel like I've been ensconced in that one for quite some time, though. Like one of my previous organizations had a lot of different, or didn't have as much horizontal, but had a lot of verticals, like writing and art and things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm already, to be honest, a little bit lost.
Let's move on. How about we talk about stakeholders?
Oh yeah.
So they're not people who are ready to stake vampires. They're people who are holding the stakes in gambling. The like third party who holds the cash while the game plays out.
But in practicality, that word means what now? It means anyone who's basically got an interest in something, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They are. Well, I mean, you could also say that it's a touch of gambling in that context too, because you're basically betting on the business succeeding.
Oh yeah. Okay.
By investing in it or having an interest in it or working for it, you are beholden to its success.
Okay, so you can think of that stake as a gambling stake. What else have we got here? Have you got any more of the? I mean, I've got loads of them. I'm just trying to find out which one to go to next.
Well, let's see. A lot of corporate terms have also come from legal contexts. They've transcended that original context, but also exist there too, sometimes with a different meaning. Like I would say in business environments, I've heard people say things like caveat and bona fide, for example.
I got a whole thing here actually on legal Latin, which we should get into. I don't know if you want to get into that just yet, or if you want to stick in the corporate world for a little bit longer, because we clearly enjoy it so much.
I mean, do you have...
Wait, I mentioned open the kimono earlier, which I haven't come across.
That term.
I've only seen it on lists of corporate jargon, I have to admit. But from what I could tell, it's sort of casually calling on the idea of flashing your genitals to someone.
It definitely is. That's the idea. Like... End of story.
Why?
I don't know. I do like I don't like when people use it necessarily, but I like the origin of 800-pound gorilla, which I referenced in the intro. It's from a joke. Where does an 800-pound gorilla sit?
I don't know. Where does an 800-pound gorilla sit?
Anywhere it wants to. And the idea here is that in corporate worlds and also in military and political environments, it's an entity that has a majority percentage of the market, so that competitors basically don't stand a chance, like Coca-Cola and PepsiCo are such large entities that all other soda brands are seen as independent or so-called challenger brands.
I see. You know, the modern forum for a lot of this, you've already mentioned it, I think, and I've already mentioned it, is LinkedIn. And wow, you don't have to scroll down a feed on there very long to find not necessarily these terms specifically, but a whole sort of parlance that doesn't exist outside of that platform, and certainly outside of the corporate world. Like you see it in a lot of job titles that you don't come across otherwise, like people referring to themselves as a something ninja or a something hacker or a something evangelist. I mean, what is a thought leader?
Swiss Army knife, right?
Yeah,
you and I are obviously thought leaders. That's what's going on here.
For sure. Influencers as well.
Honestly, we should post this episode to LinkedIn and see what happens.
Oh my goodness, we're gonna get kicked off. Speaking of odd job titles, while I was researching this, I just had a quick look on my LinkedIn. I don't go on there very often. I have to admit. I don't know why. I just don't. But I noticed that one of my friends has got a new job, and their title is Head of Strategy and Execution.
Head of Execution feels like an oxymoron.
Yeah, he will behead the head of execution. Yeah, it's a reinsurance firm, so I'm not quite sure. And they should not say execution, right? I'd just say implementation or something. Sure,
Execute the strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
That sounds bad. That sounds like a bad thing.
Yeah, I don't want to be head of execution. I mean, yeah, well,
executing a strategy also implies like halting it in its tracks, right?
True. Yeah, cutting it off in its flow. One of the other things I noticed about LinkedIn and is the way that it sort of fluffs the egos of people on. And why am I getting on? It turns out I've got all these opinions on LinkedIn. But you'll occasionally get a message from them, right? And it'll say something like, "Your expertise is being requested." And you go, and it makes you think, "Oh, I'm an expert in something, and someone wants my opinion." And what it actually is that LinkedIn has a customer satisfaction survey for you to fill in. Or it says, "You're getting noticed," which just means some people have visited your profile. But it's very clever like that.
People are switching it up a little bit as it's become obvious that a lot of what is on LinkedIn is like empty cliche. But are you familiar with the term for like the standard LinkedIn post format? Where you do like one sentence, a space, one sentence, a space, and then you come around to your like corporate hot take?
No.
It is called broetry.
Oh, that's excellent. And don't the posts usually end and everyone stood up and clapped?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Usually after someone's 8-year-old has said something very wise.
Oh, of course.
I feel like I shouldn't be being too down on the thing here. What I have noticed about LinkedIn versus other platforms is it's generally positive, mostly. Like people are upbeat on there, and that's good. They're either talking about their own achievements or they're praising other people, which seems like a nice thing compared to certain other platforms at the moment.
I have 3 or 4 friends who do LinkedIn right, and I love the work that they do. One of them is named Jade I. Powell, and she is a quote unquote LinkedIn influencer and makes income based on LinkedIn posts that she does. And it's because they're very casual. They break out of these cliches. She's just herself. Another one is Christina Garnett, who's like launched a number of businesses through her network on social media and a number of other and just her like excellent skill set. And I think that people who approach LinkedIn as humans do better and are far less insufferable.
But that's what it is. Approach it as humans. That's a rule for writing in general, isn't it? Is to write like a person rather than trying to emulate the writing of someone else.
It's all that show don't tell, as it often comes down to.
Jess and Rob's lesson for today.
Yes, indeed. One corporate term that I actually do like, and I think it's because of its other uses and perhaps because you get free stuff out of it. But it's when you're at a conference and you pick up whatever the exhibitors have, it's swag, right?
Yeah,
like swagger dates back to like Shakespeare and beyond, and it means like to sway, but it was also a slang term in the 1800s for stolen goods or loot. So like you're essentially literally looting all of the water bottles and t-shirts and beer cozies.
I think that's what's being evoked, isn't it? Because I remember I can picture images of, burglars in stripy tops and masks with a bag over their shoulder that says swag on it, which is a terrible way to commit a crime. Really blatant.
My stolen stuff.
Yeah, so I've always thought it was that. I always felt like, I was getting away with something.
I think that's the vibe. The best swag, and it's because it's the most expensive event in at least my sector, is always at the Cannes Lions Festival in France every year.
Oh, what that can. Ooh.
Yeah, I literally, one of the pieces of swag that I have is a tattoo that is on my leg that I got at the Pinterest booth, which is on the beach at Cannes.
A legit tattoo?
Yeah, it's an actual tattoo that I got that they gave me for free at the Pinterest exhibitor booth at the Cannes Lion Festival of Creativity.
Just because it's free doesn't mean you have to have it.
Well, Jess. Yeah, but they had a really cute one.
Have you got Pinterest written on your leg?
No, it doesn't say Pinterest. It's a little mountain range with a planet over it.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So shall we get onto some legal jargon, Jess?
Yeah, let's give us a little background on legal Latin.
Yes, because it's interesting that there is so much Latin used in courts, particularly in the UK and in the United States. And that's down to the fact that for many hundreds of years in England, court business was carried out in Latin. So there's a lot of that left over. But there's also the fact that the practices of the Romans sort of revered to some extent. So some of these terms have been deliberately pilfered from the Romans rather than
Roman legal systems informed modern European and Western legal systems.
Yeah, exactly. So we have all of these terms that people will have heard but not necessarily thought about precisely what they mean, like ad hominem, people would have heard, which means, well, it means literally to the person, but it's the concept of, to use a sort of soccer metaphor, of playing the man, not the ball, right? It's where you attack the individual advocating a position rather than the position itself. That's attacking something ad hominem. You already mentioned bona fide or bona fide, or you can also have mala fide, which mean in good faith or in bad faith. So it's calling into question or affirming the motivations of the person that's speaking. A really interesting one is this idea of habeas corpus, which comes up, which means you may have the body, and it relates to everyone's right to not be improperly detained, to be detained without good reason. And the habeas corpus, to have the body, is basically referring to the idea of the person having the right to appear in person before a court, before a judge, to have the reasons for their detention to be explained. And that goes back many, many hundreds of years. The right to habeas corpus, it's called the writ of habeas corpus, is what you submit, was enshrined in law in England in the 1600s, but it goes back even further back than that. Pro bono is another one that comes up in a lot of law dramas. You say, the lawyer says, I'm going to do this one pro bono because, I don't know, they've taken a shine to the defendant for whatever reason, sleeping with them or something.
That one's in the corporate world too these days. People who do like pro bono work might do, like if you're a marketing team or a creative team, you might create a logo for a nonprofit pro bono.
Oh, that's nice. And it's short for pro bono publico, so for the public good.
A word that was originally legal Latin, but now is almost entirely divorced from legal Latin in common parlance, is the word innuendo.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So what does it mean?
It continues to be a legal term, often associated with like libel and slander and defamation cases. It means a nod forward and refers to an argument that a given statement is defamatory. The example that I came up with when talking about this earlier is like if you say like a blue-haired action star embezzled $20 million, even if you didn't say the person's name, it might be assumed to be you. You're nodding to the idea of that person. And by innuendo, it defames you and damages your reputation. Now, it's sort of a nod to something inappropriate now. So that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, it means something slightly different, doesn't it, beyond the legal profession? Yeah, it's a double entendre.
One of my favorite moments from the TV show Scrubs is one of the characters says to, I think his name is Todd. Todd, you could turn anything into an innuendo, and he goes, innuendo.
Yeah, it's great, that one. Yeah, it's great.
I love that show.
Yeah, but I think strictly it would be ungrammatical to have an innuendo, but we do talk about, making an innuendo. Yeah, but really you perform innuendo strictly, I think.
Another one that has gained life outside of the legal system, I think, is quid pro quo, right? Which just means something for something. But that one's quite useful, I think.
Yeah. Quite a lot of these are, right? Ad hoc. People talk about ad hoc.
It means like to this. So like with respect to something.
Right. So ad hoc is for the purpose of, right? Isn't it? That's what it means.
This actually gets to a recurring thing that happens in like legal contexts that requires word math that I've scared my TikTok followers with a little bit. And it's this formula that's used to create like pronominal adverbs like therein, hereabouts, and wherefore. And like basically like here, there, and where get turned into demonstrative pronouns in these words. And then you attach a preposition to like say what the word does. So like there plus a preposition gives you the meaning the preposition plus that. So therein means in that. And the reason this shows up in legal contexts a lot is so you don't have to repeat things that much. So the information therein you can say over and over again rather than saying the name of wherever therein is.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the information in the thingy that we're talking about. Yeah, exactly. And that's what's behind legal Latin, is to be expeditious and precise as well. I mean, these terms are precise, and that's why they keep coming up. I don't find them particularly irritating. I don't think that they're terribly inclusive, but a lot of the time they don't really need to be, because everyone that is involved knows what they mean.
Absolutely. What I think is interesting too is the way non-Latin terms, aside from like herein and therein and whatnot, end up in legal contexts too, because because Latin and Roman legal systems were applied to like originally Germanic cultures. Sometimes we still get like hangers on, words like manslaughter, for example, which is a confusing term legally, right?
Yes. Tell us.
In both like the UK and US legal systems, manslaughter is classified as like a lesser degree of homicide than murder, implying like a lack of malice, forethought. In Middle English, it was pretty much interchangeable with murder, but murder kind of always implied an elevated degree of malice, and it was the implication that kind of let manslaughter be a lower tier word. And it is odd that one's kind of stuck around, but it is also like nearly identical to the word homicide in structure and meaning.
Yes, yeah. Man kill. Not to be confused with man's laughter.
No, yes. So good, so good.
Beyond legal Latin, you have the concept of legalese, right? Which isn't quite the same thing necessarily. Legalese is, well, actually, in British English, this is what it means. I don't know if it means the same in American English, because I actually saw this term labeled as British English when I had a look in the Collins dictionary. But legalese is the sort of impenetrable verbiage used in contracts, for example, in legal documents, rather than in open court.
Those like herein's and thereins and wherefores and such.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Impenetrable stuff.
This is a rumor I saw running around on TikTok not too long ago, probably about a year ago. There were some folks saying that testifying meant touching someone's testicles. Have you heard this one?
No.
It's so there's this theory that the words testify, testimony, and testament refer to the historic practice of ball fondling while making oaths and other promises. And even like people have written for Psychology Today that in ancient Rome, two men taking an oath might like cup one another's testicles as a sign of truthfulness. And they're on in their defense, in like Jewish and Christian scholars have interpreted the Genesis phrase "put your hand under my thigh" as like putting your hand under someone's body to demonstrate like subservience. But all of this might be like is a leap. It's a bit of a leap. Generally speaking, it's considered to be groundless according to most etymology sources. And even if it's not, it probably like doesn't have as much to do with the words themselves. Like we don't have any written or illustrated records of this happening in Rome. And like given the frequency with which Romans put genitals in their artwork, you'd think it would have come up here and there.
I'm not having it the New Testament and the Old Testament to the new ball groping and the old ball groping.
It's easy to see why like the evidence has led speculative, curious people to believe the theory, because like the Latin word testis has two meanings. One of them is witness and one of them is testicle. And the idea here was probably that like you could tell the gender of an infant by the fact that it had testicles. Like that's the
okay.
That's probably where that comes from. And it has nothing to do necessarily. You can like testify or view or witness that fact in that way.
Stranger things have been true.
Yep. Yep. I have a couple of words that were originally, so to speak, legal terms, but are now generally completely divorced from legal contexts. Or, I mean, perhaps they are still used. There's going to be a lawyer in the comments that are like, this is used every single day in my line of work. But the way that I typically consider the word paraphernalia, for example, has nothing to do with the law.
Oh, that's a fun word, isn't it? Paraphernalia.
Isn't it? It means like odds and ends, of course. But the literal meaning of the word paraphernalia, that para, and then the phernalia on it means beside the dowry.
Oh.
Yes.
So it's the sort of additional accoutrements alongside the
things a woman brought with her to the marriage outside of the dowry. So the odds and ends that are actually hers and not part of the business transaction between the families, because we love romance with a little business.
That's excellent. I like that.
Isn't that
That's
neat?
really good. Now that I'm going to have that image when I hear the word paraphernalia, and it's only going to make that already enjoyable word even better.
Another fun one is the word mayhem.
Go on.
In English and Anglo-French, mayhem was a legal term for the act of injuring a person in order to make them less capable of defending themselves, while in general usage, it referred to like any sort of like intentional violence or damage. So like it was sort of concurrently a legal term and a general term, but in a legal context, it was like basically fighting dirty.
It's quite an unusual word in the way it's structured. It doesn't look very French. It doesn't look all that English, does it either?
It's
Mayhem.
related to the word maim, and is like etymologically kind of the same word. And the original word was like maimen or something like that.
Wow. Okay. I had no idea that those started out as legal terms. Fantastic.
I have one more with a legal connection. It's more legal adjacent, but I would like to defend the use of the word legit.
You think it's legitimate?
I think it's legit. Like people will malign this word as like a lazy, newfangled shortening of legitimate, but it's very old-fangled, as a matter of fact. It dates back to the 1800s as an abbreviation of legitimate in the legal phrase legitimate theater. So in England, the 1737 Licensing Act distinguished between legitimate theater and where it could be performed. High-end theaters were licensed for legitimate theater, colloquially called legit drama, while others were limited to supposedly lower forms like pantomime and melodrama. I think that legit is legit.
Sounds legit. Sounds legit, mate. Sounds legit.
It at least has a lot of tenure.
Tenure.
And maybe I'm getting a little too educationally jargony here.
I was going to say that sounded like jargon. We haven't even gone into linguistic jargon, but I fear that we might unravel ourselves if we did do.
We might indeed.
Well, I've enjoyed this. No, I haven't enjoyed. No, I've not enjoyed all of it. Some of it has made my skin crawl. But I've enjoyed discussing with you all of this corporate jargon, and may every term that we have cited never pass our lips from here on in.
I would even go so far to say that although some of these might be scalable, none of them are Swiss Army knives that we need to keep in our linguistic toolkit unless we, are feeling a little unimaginative.
Yeah, seeking a paradigm shift or reinventing the wheel. Ew. Thanks for watching or listening to another Words Unravelled.
See you next time.